Welcome to this installment of Ron's Reviews. Once again, I'm Brian Berenshausen, speaking today with Ron McFarland, continuing our discussion about open organizations and sustainable economic development. Ron, thanks again for joining us.
Thank you. Looking forward to it.
This is a kind of a heavy one today, Ron. You want to talk about sustainable economic development and human impacts, right? Specifically, the way that humans are suffering. Why talk about human suffering? That's a pretty weighty topic.
Right. What I did, Brian, when I read that book, I mentioned the last time, when we look at sustainable economic development, one of the issues obviously is the environment we've got to protect, but we've got to think about people as well. How are they going to be impacted on environmental change? And also, forgetting about the environment right now, what is the situation for people's livelihoods? What is the poverty rate around the world? And will that change in the future? If you have people under too much, let's say, financial or economic stress, you cannot get them to think about environmental issues because they're worried about their own situation in front of them.
Right.
And so we have to look at the human situation right now. How can you improve that to the point where they can feel confident enough to address issues that are outside of their personal domain? And that's why I thought about this. And I'm not alone in this. Interesting, while I thought about the 17 Sustainable Economic Development Goals by the United Nations, when I looked at that, some of them are environmental related, mainly. Others are mainly human issues, like poverty, like hunger, like education, like health and such. So I kind of separated them into two camps. And I think they should be addressed separately and not together. And that's why we separated it this way. Gotcha. And I'm not, as I say, I'm not alone on this. There's an economist from the UK. Her name is Kate Raworth, Raworth, and she wrote a book called The Donut Economy, or Donut Economics. And imagine a donut. Outside of the donut, the exterior of the donut, those are the environmental issues, and they have to be taken care of. Inside the donut, basically the hole, that is the human issue, the human needs that people have. So she has separated them exactly the same way. And within the donut, that's the ideal place you want to be, where you're taking care of people as well as taking care of the environment. So that's is rather fascinating, but that's the reason why I separated this way. And once you understand their problems, then you can start addressing them with open organization principles.
Interesting. So, but you've been reading a different book for this particular review. What have you been studying?
No, actually, it's the same book, Brian. It's the exact same book of the
Aim of Sustainable
Economic Development, the same, but it's different parts of it.
Yeah, I meant different from The Donut Economy.
Oh, yes, that's a different book.
Right. Yep.
Yeah, The Donut Economy. Honestly, I haven't even read the book. I just heard about what she's talking about, and I said, Lord, that donut is exactly the same thing. They're all saying the same thing, but they're using different terms.
Well, we'll look forward to that review in the future. But tell us about this book.
Yeah, this book here, again, is just like a Bible. It's the textbook of economic, or I should say, sustainable economic development. And he works directly with the United Nations on this. He has traveled throughout the world, really addressing environmental issues and human relations issues. And he's very much on that socialist side. You've got to take care of your lowest or your poorest people within your community, or it will make the entire community suffer. So, basically, and when I say community, this is the broader global community. So if we cannot address the problems, for example, in South Asia or in Africa, those problems will leak into Europe and leak into the United States, just like the problems in the United States with problems in Guatemala what is it, Guatemala, El Salvador, and Honduras right now, the problems in those countries are impacting on immigration in the United States right now. So in a sense, their problem is our problem. And the environmental issues, their problem is our problem. And it's the same thing with the coronavirus. The coronavirus issue is everyone's problem. And if you have a weak link there, that weak link will cause problems in other areas as well.
Now, taking that systemic view that you usually do, you've been thinking about the way that open organization principles can apply to these issues. So how can open organization principles be applied to issues of the human impacts? You took us through the environmental impacts in your last session. What about the human impacts?
Right. Here's the same layout, except this is more toward the human impact or human suffering area. And I started out the same way with transparency. I think we've got to expose the problems so people will be, their attention will go toward the problems. They will address the problems. If you hide the problems, they won't come out, and obviously people won't address them. So first you expose the problem, make it as transparent as possible, and then you can move on to the next stage, which is the community. Once you expose the problems, then you can find people who are interested in addressing the problem. Once you get them together, then you can start to think about action plans. What can we do to solve the problem? And that's the next stage of collaboration. You start collaborating. Okay, we know what the problem is. We know we want to do it. Now let's collaborate and try to find out how we can set up an action plan to satisfy those problems. This could be at the local level. It could be at the national level. It could be at the regional level. It could be really at the global level, but that would be too broad. Really, you've got to get these down to the community level to get something done. But anyway, so you're moving through collaboration. From collaboration, you can move right into inclusivity. Now, inclusivity is a little bit tricky because quite often if you have an organization leader there that runs into problems, he will be kind of reluctant to say anything because it's embarrassing. And sometimes someone from outside will say, if you need any help, we will help you. So you have this two-way relationship. Externally, people will say, can I, let's say, be included in your project and help you if you have any problems? And also within your team or your community, within your community, you can say, listen, we need more help here. We've got to go externally. And that's where inclusivity comes into play. And I think in a lot of the developing world, honestly, funding and support and technology and a lot of expertise has got to play an important role. So I think this is a very important step right here of inclusivity. And then from inclusivity, you go right into adaptability. Let's take a look at your goals again. Is it achievable? Or if it's not achievable, how can they be adjusted? And if you can adjust them, then achieve them, at least get it under control. I don't know if we can ever completely achieve all the human suffering in the world, but at least we can get it to a reasonable level. Right now, Mr. Sachs, Professor Sachs, he's talking about the reduction of extreme poverty in the world. That has come down and down and down and down. Now it's only a few 100,000 people in the whole world are at the level of extreme poverty, not just regular poverty, which is a little bit better, but the most extreme cases where you're really suffering from day to day. That is coming down all over the world. It's come back up with the coronavirus. But for example, that's getting into an achievable area. Okay. So if it's achievable and if you've achieved what you wanted to do, then you can start and move right to the next project. Go right back to your community, go addressing a different challenge and carry on. But if you cannot, then you should be staying within this loop until the problem is solved. The problem is we don't want people to give up when it's halfway finished. It's like I want to buy a car, but I'm only getting the tire. But you cannot do anything with a single tire. You got to at least have a rough car that is manageable and moving, and then you can improve on that car, but not have one piece. So you stay within this loop, and also there will be external people that will try to shut you down. There will be people who will be fighting, even within poor countries. There will be have some people who really don't care about their own population's poverty issues. So you've got to address those issues head on. So that's an important issue. You've got to keep within, keep moving your project forward until you can say, basically, I achieved everything that I could possibly do on this.
Now, just for folks watching at home, we're also going to run this this discussion alongside an article that Ron wrote to review Professor Sachs's book. And in that article, Ron, you talk a little bit about the relationship between, these human impacts and population growth globally. Can you talk a little bit about that relationship? What is the relationship between the two?
Right. One of the things is, take a look at the next slide, Brian. The population right now, in the next 30 years, the population will grow, estimated right now, by around 2 billion people. So this is a moving target. Today's poverty and today's human suffering is not going to be the exact same thing in 30 years. And in 30 years, that's where we want to address, we want to achieve, and we want to solve our environmental problems, right? That's what we want to overcome and have sustainable economic development, which does not impact on the environment. But unfortunately, if the population changes, that's going to influence our ability to clean up the environment, basically. So what we've got to think about is we've got to think about 9.7 billion people that is growing all over the world. We've got to think about, how do I take care of those people? Because that's what the population is estimated at right now.
And that reminds me too of what you said a couple of minutes ago, which is, the necessity of the loop, right? That this is an ongoing process. It's an ongoing process because the situation on the ground is always changing, right? I mean, if population's always increasing or shifting globally, you're going to need to, continue to adapt. So to your point earlier about, being done with the work, right? I don't think it's just not, doesn't work that way. These problems don't work that way. So, globally speaking, where are we seeing the biggest growth then? Where is this, can you break this graph down a little bit for us globally?
Right. Take a look at the next chart. This is the whole world. Now, notice the green area in this chart. It's hard to see the numbers right there. That green area, that is where the population is growing the fastest. So you can see centered right in Africa and South Asia really is the greatest growth in the world right now. Unfortunately, those are some of the poorest nations in the world too. The United States is not growing. Here in Japan, it's almost shrinking. So we're going to have immigrants to take care of our old people, including me.
I've read about that phenomenon. Sure. Yeah.
Right. So anyway, in those African nations, and just for your information, I've traveled to around 17 of them. And a lot of the African nations, actually, their population is growing at a very, very high rate, but unfortunately, their economic development is not increasing.
I see.
So that's where the problem is. But anyway, targeting in population growth, it's going to be Africa. And Sachs, his main theme on this is really, if you want to solve the problem of population growth in a poor country, the main way to do that is through education, particularly women's education or girls' education. Because you can educate them, they're going to want to not have 6 or 7 children. And when I travel through those countries, there are countless times where a family will have a family of 10, of which their own children are, let's say, 4 or 5 of them, of the children. And the other children are from relatives or like an uncle and an aunt who died, and their children have been adopted.
I see.
So you have this adopting situation. And you've got other cases, families will say, I need to have 5 children because I'm going to assume that 2 of them will die before they're 5 years old.
I see. I see.
They make that assumption.
Oh,
and that is the environment they're living in.
So can you then talk about the impact of that on the economic situation in these countries?
Right. Let's take a look at the economics a little bit. In terms of GDP, that's GDP in terms of numbers right now. This is, do you know, have you ever heard of purchasing power parity?
I don't think so.
Okay, basically what that is, you're taking a look at the GDP, but you're adjusting for the cost of living within the country on basic living things.
Gotcha.
For example, if you bought let's say a carton of milk in Raleigh, it might not be the same price as the same carton of milk I would buy in Tokyo. So they make that adjustment for basic living items. They make an adjustment in terms of a dollar adjustment.
So it's sort of like, is it like the Big Mac index? Right? What's the cost of a Big Mac in different countries? Have you ever heard of that?
That's right. In a sense, it's like that. So you're getting the Big Mac in both countries, basically.
Right. Yep.
Even though your Big Mac may be twice as expensive as mine.
Sure.
So that doesn't mean that I'm getting a half of a Big Mac.
Right. Gotcha. Okay, I'm with you.
So they make that adjustment, and I don't know how they do it, but it's a very tight count. They've got to monitor it. They got to put it into a number, or else it doesn't make any sense.
Sure.
So that's where they make that adjustment.
Okay, great.
And that's what it is. And basically, right there in the center, right there, here again, right in Africa, is your poorest country, most of your poorest countries in the world.
Interesting.
And that's where the population growth is.
Okay. Yeah. And so. Oh, interesting. Okay. So is there potential for growth in the future then?
Right. Actually, they're growing right now. Okay, the next slide right here, this is basically the poorest of the poor countries in the world. All the red little countries right there, red regions, those are the poor countries. And I look through all of those countries and I wonder, have I been to any of those countries? And I've only been to 2. I've been, okay, this slide doesn't have it. Sorry, I'm going to have to back up. I've been to Tanzania, and I have been to Ethiopia. And in Tanzania, for example, when I was there anyway, I would be driving down the road and people are bringing out charcoal to the street corner. I thought, what are they bringing out charcoal for? And basically in those countries, there's no electricity. And charcoal is your heating. Your heating for the whole country or charcoal.
Wow.
And they do it from they chop down trees and then they produce these charcoal and they sell it on the street. And I remember in Kenya, now Kenya is not one of these poorest countries, but I remember traveling around Kenya and we were going around visiting the dealers. This is working with General Motors Kenya. And I was visiting the dealers before I'm going to start my sales seminar. And the marketing manager, he took me to his mother's home. And before he got to the home, he says there was a little village there. And he says, I've got to buy some oil. I said, okay, let's buy some oil. And he buys this big bottle of oil. And he takes it to his mother in his home. And I said, what is the oil for? And he said, all of the area, that's their lighting. Because here again, they have no electricity. And we had a tea there. That means you have to sit outside because they're cooking the oil inside the house, and there's so much smoke in there you can't stay in the house. So you can't cook and eat in the house. It's just too much smoke inside the house. So you've got to sit outside and then wait for the cooking to finish, clear out the air, and then you can go inside. So that's the kind of living, and that's not even one of these poorest countries. So you can get a feeling for the environment. Now, how can we talk about sustainable economic development in an environment like that?
Right.
We've got to get electricity to those people, and it's got to be so cheap, almost to the point of being free, that they will get away from this charcoal, and they will get away from the burning of oil and such. And all they do is they live off live off the land, subsistence living. So that's the environment in these countries. And as I say, I've only been to 2 of them. The other countries in Africa I've been to, they've always had raw materials. They've had diamonds, they've had gold, they've had oil or something like that. So they're richer nations than in these 50 nations here. So this is the environment, Brian, that we're really looking at.
But the problem, I mean, there's more complexity here. The problem is more complex than GDP can account for, right? The situation is more complex. So
that's right.
Here, what should we be looking at?
Yeah. Here, the next slide, this is the GDP. So you can look right here in the developing countries, that last group. That is the GDP for all the developing countries. But even those numbers do not match the population growth. So really, their standard of living with the population growth is not the GDP is not matched to the population growth. And I noticed that even when I was in Nigeria. In Nigeria, that's a booming country. It's got oil all over the place. It's got diamonds. It's got all kinds of things. Why isn't it expanding? It is because the population is expanding far greater than the economy is.
I see. Now, one of the things that you've been reading and talking about is the Human Development Index.
Right.
I'm not familiar with that. Can you explain what that is?
Right. The Human Development Index. Here again, this is not here. I've got in this chart GNI. That's gross national income. Gross national income obviously is an average for the average person's income in the country. And that is very close. In my economics days, we always compare that with the GDP per capita. How much is it one individual on average producing in the country? That's the GDP per capita. And also the GNI is the income. Those two are directly related. But the human development covers more important issues. So take a look at this chart. One, it covers life expectancy. What is the expectancy of someone lasting more than 5 years of age? Wow. So and they also look about the infant mortality, which that is the rate of what is the percentage of children of the total, I should say, of the total population that die before they're 5 years old. And that number is very, very low in all industrialized countries, but it's not in the developing world where they can't even afford medicine. Sometimes they can't even afford a doctor. So you have this high infant mortality. That's the one factor. The second factor, here again, this is all health related. The second factor is what is the longevity of life? For example, in Africa, it may be 50 years of age. In Japan, it's quite high. It's higher than the United States, a little bit higher. It might be 78, 79, something like that. So what is that amount, and how can those issues of health and longevity be addressed? That's one factor. The next factor is education. How many people are able to go to school and basically learn? And what is the average number of schooling within the country? So that is you might say your gateway to getting out of poverty. You've got to be able to acquire information and give information. And that is what you get in your schooling. So that is the second issue. And the third issue, obviously, are those economic issues that I talked about. So you have those three factors, not the single factor. And it comes into this Human Development Index. And it's heavily written about, and it's directly related to human happiness and such. And they write, the United Nations writes a report on this. What is the Human Development Index? And they do it for 156 countries.
Now, I know we don't have a lot of time, Ron, but I'm wondering if to help us make sense of this, for example, you centered a lot of this discussion on Africa. How does Africa compare with on the HDI?
Right. The reason I say this on Africa is that's where the greatest human development issues are. those are the countries that index the lowest when it comes to Human Development Index, and also southern Asia, like parts of India and Sri Lanka and Pakistan, Bangladesh. I've never been to Bangladesh, but I've been to India quite a few times, and I'm very worried about India right now with the coronavirus issue. But those are the main countries you have to think about when you talk about human development.
Right. So you had talked earlier about, food, population, food, subsistence. What's the relationship between population growth and food in some of these countries?
Right. What you've got to do in these countries, you cannot, if you just ship them food, they're just going to eat the food, obviously. So you remember the last time I talked about the Millennium Development Development Goals?
Yep.
Remember that ended in 2015? Well,
yes.
During that period, through Africa, they knew that the biggest problem was in Africa. So they went to every region in Africa and they found out, well, they've got to be growing something now. What are they doing right now to feed themselves? And what you want to do is you don't want to come in with something completely new that no one in the country knows anything about. You want to take a look at what they're doing right now and improve on that, simply because that is what the environment is appropriate for. So what they did is they looked at every region in Africa to find out what is the appropriate crops, what is the things that they're doing right now, and then how, with all the technology in the world, including information technology and sensors and fertilizers and grain specifications and what do you call it? Different kind of grain development and such.
Yeah.
Modified. What do you call it? Modified.
GMOs, genetically modified.
Right.
Yeah.
Generically modified seeds and such.
Mm-hmm.
How can you help those people? So that's what they tried to do, and that was very, very successful. And that's what they want to continue today, to handle the issues in Africa.
Now, you said that the author of this book, Jeffrey Sachs, works with the United Nations. How has the United Nations kind of framed these problems?
Right. This next chart right here, here's your, basically they are trying to, every government provides funds called the official development assistance. And those are my data right there is a little bit old. I think it was 2005 or something, 2005, 2006. I could get updated, but I just want to give you a picture of where officially from governments, they're providing assistance to these countries. And they're not just giving them the money. They're giving it in some kind of, here again, strategic project to help them solve a particular problem. You don't want to just give them raw money. And that's at the official level. That's government level. And then you have, let's say, religious organizations doing, when I went to, I mentioned I went to Ethiopia. I was surprised that there were far, far more churches than there are hospitals in Ethiopia. And the reason for that, of course, is you have a lot of religious investments in those countries. And unfortunately, I hate to say this, but there's a lot of suffering and dying in those countries.
Yeah.
So, but anyway, you've got that type, and then you've got organizations like the Gates Foundation and other foundations around the world providing assistance. So there's a lot of assistance going in, and they're trying to address this. So I wanted to mention that this is not nothing, but we've got to address this issue from many fronts.
Mm-hmm. Hence the importance of the open organization approach. Right. Okay. So can you talk regionally about these issues? Like regionally speaking, how do different regions address these?
Well, each region has different, I don't have any specific cases. Sorry, I'll have to go back here.
Oh, okay.
I don't have any specific cases of what they're doing with each money, with each allowed money. But basically what I'll be doing on the next presentation, that's where you get into more governance.
I see.
And of course, here again, going back to the next slide here,
right.
This is all the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. It started from the millennium, started 2000 to 2015 was the Millennium Sustainable Development Goals. It finished in 2015. Shortly after that, these Sustainable Development Goals were developed. And as I said last time, I talked about environmental issues.
Right.
But have a look here, Brian. Look at number one.
Yep.
That is getting rid of poverty all over the world. So that is human related. The next one is hunger related specifically. And obviously, if you reduce the hunger, you're going to improve on the poverty as well. So they have a relationship with each other. The third one right there is good health and well-being. Here again, this is good medical care and such. And the next one, quality education. As I say, I was mentioning earlier, quality education is extremely important to bring people out of poverty. Give them skills that they can start to do things for themselves. You don't want them kept on poverty and kept them dependent on the rest of the world forever. So that's another sustainable development goal. Another is gender, and I mentioned gender, particularly education. In a lot of countries, particularly the Middle East, only recently, I think, in Saudi Arabia, the women are not allowed to drive. They're not allowed to work. There's a whole list of things that they not allowed to do. And that's one of the problems with Afghanistan right now. The suffering that women go through and the restrictions they have. So anyway, how do we address those issues? And if you can address those issues, automatically, if you have more women educated, more women working, then the population growth problem will start to reduce. It happens automatically. You don't have to have a lot of parental planning and such. Just through the education, a tremendous amount can be achieved. Another one is, here again, basic, let's say, working conditions, healthy working conditions, and that kind of thing is, here again, that's human related. Another one is inequality. You don't want, of course, one family, like, for example, Panama, there's 8 families that basically own all of the major real assets in the entire country of Panama. And that here again, that is very, very lopsided inequality. So you want to make sure that the economic, let's say, benefits are spread throughout the country. And that's one of the important points. And the last one, I didn't talk about this very much. Here again, peace and prosperity. We want to reduce wars. There's always conflicts around the world, and that is human related. I didn't address this here, but that's another one of the issues. So those are the roundup. Now, knowing what those goals are, then we can move to very targeted projects and then indicators of each project. And that's what I want to talk about next time. And then from there, we can bring in our open organization principles, how to start attacking those.
Right.
And anyway, basically, that is my little presentation here. And that's what I want to do next time. Oh, I've got one more slide I forgot.
Okay.
This slide right here is really Sachs's data. I'll go through it very, very quickly. Basically, if you look at the red on this chart, first in Sub-Sahara, that's where the major problem is, not only for the human suffering, but the environmental issues as well. Most of them are right in, and you saw that in the earlier chart about Africa. And it's also true in South and Central Asia. Those are the true problems. But unfortunately, the main places that these problems got to be solved are going to be in Europe with their technology and within North America with this, here again, it's technology and expertise. So people in America and people in Europe will say, why do I care about Africa? But here again, this is what I was saying earlier. The North Americans and the Europeans have to help the Africans and the South Asia. And they're doing that right now with coronavirus right now, simply for their own benefit. If you don't solve their problems, you're not going to solve your problems. So those are the things that I was trying to mention here. And there's one other factor here. Notice the problem of health in North America, Latin America, and Europe. there's a huge problem of obesity. It's not here in Japan, but it's every time I go stateside, I notice this is a huge, huge problem. Obesity, and here again, you're eating a lot of the wrong things and you're becoming overweight, which impacts on your health on a number of issues.
Interesting.
And basically, that's what I wanted to say.
So you've set a good stage for us between this presentation and the last one, and it sounds like next time you're going to talk to us about how we can use open organization principles to start building some governance structures to help begin addressing some of these problems. Is that right?
That's right, and that's what I want to do next time. So here again, I've armed everybody with a lot of problems. Basically environmental problems and human relations problems, or human impact problems. So I armed everyone with a lot of problems, and now we can start taking those problems, putting them into goals. From goals, we can assign targets. From targets, we can assign indicators. From the indicators, that's where the open organization principles start. Then I can start working with very, very strategic tasks and activities. And that's what I'd like to talk about next time.
Well, we'll look forward to next time then, for sure. Ron, thanks for taking the time to speak with us today. Folks, if you're watching and reading, please join us at theopenorganization.org or theopenorganization.community to interact with us, read our stuff, watch our videos, and have a conversation with us. Ron's there and be happy to chat with you. Ron, thanks again for your time. And we will see you next time.
Okay. Thanks a lot, Brian.
Thank you.